Welcome to Shop Talk, everyone. I'm Brandy.
And I'm James, and we talk about all things related to cross-cultural workers and mental health.
Thanks for joining us, and welcome to Season 4. Glad you could join us today. And today we're talking to Hannele Secchia, and I'll give you a little introduction so you can know a little bit more about her. Hannele has been with SIL serving in Ethiopia for the last almost 15 years. She's also a SIL MK. Her parents served in Ethiopia for 23 years. Unlike her parents, she is not a Bible translator or a linguist, but has been working in HR and staff care, both at SIL Ethiopia as well as Bingham Academy, which all 4 of her children have attended. Her passion is member care, and she's been caring not only the SIL community in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, but also the wider expat community. She's also currently serving as the president of Families and Global Transition. I'm really glad you could be with us today. And we're going to talk to Hannele about the sandwich generation. So before we get into that, I thought we'd do like a little fun thing. Hey, what's everyone's favorite sandwich? James, what about you?
I love a sandwich of all kinds. If I had to pick, I'm going to choose a steak sandwich with sauteed mushrooms and peppers and melted provolone cheese on it, on some sourdough bread.
That sounds just like my husband.
Well, Mark and I can hang out sometime if he's ever in Spain.
For sure. Lots of meat. So I would say, I don't know if this counts for the sandwich, but I would love a salmon and cream cheese bagel. That would be my choice.
Nice.
Let's count it.
Yeah. I like a grilled pimento cheese sandwich. Let's
all right.
express it on James's face. So good.
Do you know what pimento cheese is?
Me, not really.
Yeah.
No. I think it's something spicy. Is that right?
It's a blend of grated cheeses with pimentos. I think like pickled red peppers.
Yeah.
And some spices in a spread. And I think it's a real Southern U.S. thing. We're not just talking about sandwiches today, or the generation that especially loves to eat sandwiches, but we're talking about the sandwich generation. And Hannele, I wonder if you could give us just a broad definition of what the sandwich generation is.
I hope I get it right. So I believe it's the generation of people that find themselves in that season between having aging parents and children that they're launching out of the home. So they have different challenges on both ends that they're trying to juggle.
Yeah, I hear juggling, and I resonate with that. It seems like you're in this generation, you have different cares and different responsibilities on both ends that you're trying to figure out. And often you're trying to prioritize and reprioritize, who gets your attention and your energy.
Lots of expectations coming both said and unsaid.
Yeah, especially from actually both ends, I guess, but aging parents would have expectations perhaps that hadn't been talked about. And then potentially children that you're launching as well may have ideas about where they're going to go to university or college and how you're going to support them through that. Maybe they're getting married, having kids. Are you going to live close to them or not? All of those questions, end up on the table during this season.
It's one of the most common populations or demographics that I work with in counseling, particularly cross-cultural workers. Part of that is, I think, because of the overall age of cross-cultural workers is getting older. I think there's a lot that kind of fit in that sandwich generation. And in particular, Generation Z has not been historically super willing to launch. And I think there's some TCK parts that make that even more complicated of helping them reach adulthood that takes perhaps a lot longer than some parents were expecting.
Also, the older generation is living longer now.
Right.
So does it seem to you guys that the sandwich generation, like this has been around for as long as their families have been around, but does it seem like people are talking about this more now?
I haven't had a whole lot of conversations actually actively with my friends about this, but it is obviously aging parents and launching children are topics that we talk about all the time, but I don't think we talk about the challenges of that.
So we've touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the other unique challenges that you see with this?
I mean, I think even our transition right now is very much around this whole issue of launching children and having aging parents. So it's so fascinating because I think especially for missionary families or cross-cultural families trying to make these decisions about when they're going to leave. Are they leaving the field with their kids while they're launching them? Are they going to end up in the same places where their parents are? How do they make sure they're close enough to their parents to give help Or do they stay on the field and allow their children sometimes to care for their aging parents? That's something that I've seen. I've got one friend who is flying backwards and forwards constantly. There's a challenge for you. You
Mm,
know, the cost of going backwards and forwards to the UK constantly to care for her father now. Her mother just died. And trying to make sure that he's settled. She's the only child, so no other
mm,
siblings around to help. So there's another piece to that particular puzzle. But I see that a lot. And then there's others that are trying to decide, are they going to bring their, maybe it's a father or a mother that are left. Are they going to bring them to the field to actually live with them there? So I have one friend wrestling her way through that. So it's like often with cross-cultural living, there's so many different moving pieces and factors that trying to get an overall picture of the whole and trying to make decisions in that, I think, is incredibly tiring and can also be challenging. So, James, I'm not surprised that you're seeing a lot of us in your office, virtual or, yeah, actual.
And it's true because you just mentioned one tiny perspective of what do we do with a parent? And while that is going on, there's still all of the stuff for the kids. And I think what makes it hard is that there's probably no one right answer for any direction. Parents have a
Right.
specific need. Maybe they want you close, not too close. Or if you have siblings, their expectation may be if you're back in the home country that you're going to pick up perhaps some of the burden that they've been carrying while you're gone. Then there's on the other end of the sandwich, there's the kids who have the very normal things of graduations. Do you go to all the graduations? Well, what do you have? Two, three. In your case, do you have four kids? Is that right? Three kids?
Yeah, for
Right. So do you miss out on the high school graduation to go to the college graduation, or do you visit your parents who are in the hospital? How do you know if it's serious enough to potentially miss this other thing? And then you have potentially weddings or babies being born, and wow, that's a lot.
And I
yeah.
think with aging parents too, it's a moving target because
Mm,
their health is not a constant and their state is not a constant. So I felt constantly having to reevaluate what's working with their needs and how do we need to shift that. And so it is a lot of mental and emotional work, even if you're not necessarily physically there, but just trying to figure out like what's best for everyone.
Yeah, I think, even with my mom has had health issues, particularly heart issues now for maybe 7 or 8 years. So probably half of our time here. And I know I've constantly kept thinking, okay, what does this mean? Because our plan was always to care for my parents as they aged, which is one of the
mm,
reasons why we're moving to Finland. But that was always like, is it going to be next year? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be next year? Are we going to make it through our 15 years that we had committed to in Ethiopia? And by the grace of God, we have. But that mental game has been
mm.
going on for so long, as well as the emotional piece. So I find myself thinking, wow, I'm so grateful that my mom has made it and that we can actually live in the same country with her now for a while and care for her. But that was never a given.
And as you mentioned, I think James mentioned earlier too, there are sometimes family expectations or sibling expectations, adult sibling expectations, or maybe family culture expectations of how this should look and how does that expectation match with what your capacity is too, I think is another challenge.
Mm.
And their capacities and that particular moment in time. Because often all of the siblings are also sandwiching their own kids and trying to care for parents. And
In our family, for example, because we're already second generation cross-cultural, so in our family we have 5 different nationalities, and with family members across the globe in different places. So my sister is in Los Angeles, my brother is in Munich, and I'm in Addis at the moment, but moving to Helsinki. So but I'm the oldest, so the
mm,
expectation is that I will be the one that does those things, which is fine. But you're right about those expectations that can be there right from the beginning. That's been the expectation in our family probably for most of my adult life.
has
So
has
yeah,
that ever been spoken?
yeah, with my parents it has.
Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily with my siblings.
They
But at
didn't
least you
have to.
knew.
Your parents did it for them.
True.
But at least you knew, like you've known for
Mm.
years that that was the expectation. So I think that's a nice thing to have that communication. I don't want to say that people who live in their home country or passport country have it easier, because everyone has their unique challenges. But I think if you're living there already, then maybe, you don't have the distance challenges so much, and just I guess the struggle with, what our calling is, and do we feel like our calling is to care for our aging parents? Is our calling to be on the field, and what we see is finishing the work there too. And I think that can add something to the mix that can be potentially stressful.
Mm, very true. And I think the other piece that I found challenging is trying to gauge from a distance how well somebody is. It is
Mhm.
virtually impossible to do unless you're face to face with them.
Yeah.
So, you're like, is she dying, or is she actually going to pull through? Is she lying in bed and unable to function? Or is she actually mobile? You can't gauge any of that from a distance. So you're constantly making these judgment calls about, when is it time for me to go? Do I need to go or not?
And are they being truthful with you about how they're doing?
Right.
Right.
Totally.
My father-in-law just spent 10 days in the hospital. So he was there. We were in the States. We came back. So Ellie was in the hospital with him the first couple of days, and then had to decide, do we go ahead and go back? And so she came back, and it's just in that place of every day wondering, is it going to go down and she needs to go? And my mom, who's a nurse practitioner, helped us talk through just some specific points. Like, if this happens or this happens, then we go back. And that relieves some of that pressure of unknowing, specifically related to the medical situation of uh, the older generation of the sandwich. And we're really not quite sandwiched. There's some unique circumstances for his health. But to be able just to have some kind of markers was so helpful of, if he gets put on a ventilator, or if the specific results on the kidney and the liver aren't good because the body needs that to process the medication. Really helpful. And I think for parents of young adults, particularly if they're in college, to say, okay, we're seeing perhaps their grades really plummet and they're not able to tell us why, that might be a good indicator. We need to go back for a visit. Or we cannot get them on the phone for 3 weeks at a time, and they kind of need us, and we need to know. And it's helpful to actually write down what some of those indicators are on either end of the sandwich, to take the pressure of the constantly having to figure it out off.
I think you've hit on something really important there, actually, James, that, there are people who kind of live every day by the seat of their pants, and they, just don't like to do that planning piece
Right.
or that thinking piece. But I found that it's so key for mental health, particularly, and also for decision making, that you actually do the work of thinking through those things, both with your kids that you've launched and also with your aging parents. I think it's really quite a good tool to do that, so that you can, you're not constantly reevaluating the situation
Right.
and trying to make decisions.
Yeah,
It just
I like
gets so costly.
Yeah.
That space, even for the highly flexible, the high P on the Myers-Briggs person, I think the extra challenge of cross culture is you just can't always drop and go. Flights aren't every day. Ticket prices can skyrocket. You can't even afford them. There's just so many other factors. Also, we work and have jobs and live cross culturally, and like there's other things that make it more challenging. So having some kind of limits, even with the college kids or college age kids, if they're working, and to, before they are launched, to kind of have a plan of, here's how you communicate, mom and dad, that you need help. Because a lot of times those kids have their own reasons for not wanting to share, just like the parents. One of you two said earlier, like, can you trust the information you're getting? And a lot of TCKs really struggle in that kind of cultural adaptation and readjustment, and they don't want to pull their parents off the field doing whatever important work they're doing. And it's helpful on the front end if you can actually write down, okay, here's what we're looking for. I want to talk to you on the phone once a week, no matter what. If you can't do that, we're just going to show up. So,
Or knock it on your dorm room door within 24
that's right.
hours.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to see your face.
Yeah.
I think that gives you more margin to deal with the things when they do come up, if you already have a plan.
Yeah. And I know one of the conversations we had with our daughter, which I felt was really key, was, we just launched our oldest basically last summer. So she's into her second semester at university in the UK right now. And one of the things we said to her was, this is the toughest transition that you are going to face as a TCK, probably, is this one from on the field back to one of your homes. And we said to her, you know, if it doesn't work out, there's an airplane ticket with your name on it. You just come home, and that's fine. It's not a failure. We just know that this is the toughest transition, and not everyone can manage it at this particular age or with the particular circumstances. And I think it was really key just to send that message that it's not a failure. It's, we're going to try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll come up with a plan B. And I think that's been really helpful for her to know that she can call it at any point in time. And, you know, we talked about it will be hard. So you need to try and do the hard. But if your mental health is plummeting and you're depressed and you can't pull yourself out of that with all the help around you, then, you know, we need to do something different.
That's beautiful. Life's not pass fail. So helping kids know that is just huge.
I think it's a gift you give her to be able to say, this isn't failing, this is just pivoting. So we've had those conversations with our youngest too. Like, this is, we're heading in this direction for a while. And if that's not the direction, then that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You've got your whole life ahead of you.
I think TCKs put so much pressure on themselves when their parents are on the field doing, you know, God's work, that they should make it work, that they can't possibly be an extra burden. Or and I think, like, we're a lot of us are perfectionists, you know, as cross-cultural workers, and so we pass that on to our kids, unfortunately. So I think those messages about it's okay, we can have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, and it, you know, your life will still be successful. You can still, you know, end up in a different place, but that's no problem at all. I think those messages are really important.
Yeah. I mean, not to get off on TCK so much, but yeah, we tell our eldest, who's 22, like, because you're in this job now doesn't mean you have to be in this job forever. You're 22 years old, so you have time to pivot and again and again, and giving that permission, I think, is freeing.
The statistics on TCKs who change, I think, degrees is significantly higher, schools is significantly higher, and I think that's a really normal part of the experience. Is part of the adjustment is actually having to try a few different things to find out what it is.
And I think, again, that frees up the parents. If you have those conversations ahead of time with your TCKs, I think it frees you up, because I know that if my daughter's not doing well, she will call me and say, hey, Mom, can I just come home? Because we had that conversation. So I don't have to worry about, is she making it or not? I really think that she would call me if she wasn't.
That's what a gift you've given her, Hannele. I love that. We've talked about some of the challenges of being in the sandwich generation, and I wonder what some of the unique, I don't know, blessings are, or unique, the positives of being in this generation.
Frequent flyer miles.
True. More trips home. I mean, if I think about my friend who's, you know, traveling backwards and forwards to the UK at the moment, you know, there are blessings in that her kids are also in the UK, 2 of them. So she gets to see them more often because of her parents' situation. And I think you can always turn these things around to the positive. And, you know, we're kind of trying to do both at the same time in our family. We had always said we would move back to wherever the girls were going once they were launching. And our second one will launch this summer. And then we had also said, we'll look after my parents. And we never knew if we could combine those 2 things. But thankfully, you know, we're able to do that, because our second is hoping to live in Finland with us if she gets into the university there. And our first will only be a hop away in the UK. And so I feel that's a huge blessing, that actually sometimes you can combine the 2 and you can make it work. It doesn't always have to be this one or that one, a choice. Sometimes it can be a combo.
Sometimes you might have to push towards that combo, whether it's helping parents think through perhaps changing location for their health to be closer to city or to life or to family, at the same time strategically positioning yourself close to where perhaps kids are starting to launch, whatever that looks like. I think there's the natural way that happens, and then sometimes a little bit of work to encourage that. There's a space for time and agency, and also a space for being able to advocate for your need as the care provider of multiple generations.
I think too, if you're a natural carer, maybe like an Enneagram 2. What a great place to be in. You're watching your children launch, you're watching them, you're learning to care for them in different ways, and you have the opportunity to give back to your parents at the same time. And so that I think that could be a unique blessing of being at this point in time, is that you get to see two different generations, maybe moving in different directions, but seeing the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. And I hadn't thought about the fact that as I'm sort of launching two kids out, I'm almost bringing my parents closer. It's almost like
Mm.
filling that gap, not that those kids won't need me, but they need me in different ways. And it's not such a constant, but with my parents, it'll become more of a constant. So there's this real shifting of seasons that's happening. And there's definitely beauty in that. I am a TCK, so I do like change.
Do you feel like there are some special conversations you need to have with your adult children as you're moving toward caring for your aging parents?
I think we've had those conversations along the way because this has always been our plan. I'm very much a planner, in case you didn't pick up on that. And so we've had those conversations with them all the way through. Our plan was to be here 15 years. Our plan was that our youngest wouldn't finish her schooling at Bingham. Our plan was then that we would care for my parents. So they've been part of those conversations all along. And it's been interesting to see our third daughter, who has already gone with my husband. Her heart was really to live with my parents. That was what she was most looking forward to. And so I think we've instilled in them that sense of that's our family value, is to care for our parents. And I know that that's not for everyone. And there's no judgment there at all. But I'm just saying, like, it's good to talk through those values with your kids from early on, and to think through to involve them, I guess, in the planning of what are we going to do about grandparents.
Holly, I just think it's great listening to you talk about your youngest and how she wanted to go and help care for your parents. Because I was thinking, oh, is she sad about leaving Ethiopia and not being able to graduate from school there? But it sounds like you've been able to have conversations with her along the way to prepare her for this.
And they've been concerned about my parents as well. They carry that. Actually, TCKs carry that care for their grandparents, whether they talk about it or not. And so it's nice that they can now be involved in resolving some of the concerns that we've had.
I think speaking it out, and because so much of the TCK journey is about finding identity, where am I from? Where do I belong? There's a piece of belonging that's strongly connected with family, and that would include things like grandparents. Like that's part of their identity that bridges even beyond the mixed cultures of, do I fit more here or there? Am I this or that? Of saying, oh yeah, this is my family. That's kind of my belonging. And it might wind up being in the places wherever your parents, the sandwich parents live, because that's probably been a regular part of the visitation over the years, whenever back in home country, back in those cities. So I think it's powerful to talk about it when they're young and even into adolescence and young adulthood, helping connect them to be present and supportive and available, because it's really helping them fill some of their identity longingness of, we are a people. And I think that's really powerful. That's been part of what has made nomadic communities thrive as they move around all the places in the world, is their identity is really in themselves as a people. And I think helping bridge that, the sandwich generation, bridging that between their kids and their parents, is really, really powerful. So I'm glad you've done that.
It's fascinating you mentioned that, James, because one of the things she was talking about before she left was also, can I ask some of my relatives, like my aunt, her great aunt, to take her thrift store shopping? Would that be okay? I want to find a way to connect with them. Who can I ask to teach me about makeup and to take me shopping for makeup? She was intentionally thinking through how she could connect with our relatives in that area. So it just ties in so nicely with what you're saying, James, about finding identity in that larger family unit.
How old is your youngest, Hannele?
So this one's actually my third. She's almost 15.
Wow, that's incredibly mature.
Also a hard time to transition.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
You mentioned earlier that you had at least one colleague who was considering bringing their aging parents or maybe one of their parents overseas with them. And I wonder if either one of you have had experience in talking to people who have done that and what that's been like.
There was one lady with SIL actually years ago who had her mom living with her who had dementia. So in some ways that was a little bit easier because it almost didn't matter where she was in the world. She wouldn't know. And again, in Ethiopia, it's somewhat easier because you've got someone that can care for them. It's inexpensive to have someone stay with them the whole time. So she could work and still have a carer that she could afford in the home with her mom. But the challenges were then the repatriation of the body at the end when she died. So, and those were unforeseen. So I think sometimes we don't think about those like the full package deal, if that makes sense. Like up until the very end, have we thought through every little last, you can't think through every little last eventuality, but as much as possible, have we investigated what the laws are in the country around this, for example? And I know that that was a huge challenge at the end for her. So although she had it was beautiful for the time period when her mom was alive, I know that at the end it was incredibly challenging.
James, have you talked to anyone else who's done this?
Yeah, I've known a few. It's pretty wide ranging, the challenges from sometimes getting a visa and permission to be in a country. Often they're retirees, so they have some sort of pension, but sometimes it's just too daunting. I've known a few families that have actually picked another location, kind of like going to Kandern, Germany, so out of the country of service, but closer. And it's possible. I think it's often a loss for the sandwichees, we will, trying it, because their world is changing a lot, even in the context of which they're living, and that can be hard. And what's the nice way to say, sometimes it's hard to teach old dogs new tricks? Sometimes that cross-cultural adjustment for the parents who might be in their 80s and 90s is just absolutely overwhelming. So it kind of depends. For a lot of TCKs, they grew up cross-culturally, so their parents are used to cross-cultural things, and it's a really natural and easy and comfortable fit. And sometimes the easier decision is to go back to the home context and make trips and work remotely, things that are much easier to do now than they were even 10 years ago. I'm thinking about some of our singles that listen, and they're not really a sandwich because they might not have offspring, so they're more of a tostada or your bagel with salmon and cream cheese.
An open face sandwich.
That's right. So, but still that difficult phase of trying to navigate, how do I work and do the thing that I'm good at and called at in the location that I've been trained to do it in, and then also care. And sometimes there's expectations on family for the single cross-cultural worker who it's easier for them to go and to be available and travel, to be the main one responsible for caring for parents. And whether it's spoken or not, sometimes that's felt. I see that a lot, that the singles trying to figure out how to care for parents in that life stage. And sometimes it's just a lot more pressure.
We've definitely seen that here, especially with my generation in terms of age-wise, that they end up living almost in two worlds at the same time because they have that flexibility, which is the blessing. But the curse piece of it is that you don't really settle at home. You're never really settled on the field. You live in this in-between place constantly. And that for your mental health is also incredibly difficult. And I don't know what the answers are, but it takes a lot of resilience to get through that season.
Which sometimes is an unknown amount of time.
Exactly.
What are some things that you both see that people in this generation or in this situation can do to care for themselves?
Good question. I need to think about that. But I do think what James was saying earlier about having parameters, having thought through things ahead of time, I think that's really good self-care in this season. And likewise, the conversations that you have with your children to prepare them for the reality of what's coming, not painting this rosy picture and not, scaring them to death, but something in the middle where you've had those conversations with them. I think you can do that on both ends. The open communication, I guess, is what I'm saying, both with your aging parents and with your children, because you talked a lot about the expectations, Brandy, earlier. And if you haven't laid those out on the table, that's where conflict arises. That's where people get hurt. And so I think having that open communication going is also a way to care for yourself.
It gets more, there's different levels of challenge for sure, but in that phase where people are gone for 2 to 4 years and come back, they can sometimes kind of lose track of where people are and how they're doing. And then all of a sudden they're back and they're like, oh my gosh, when did my parents get old? So I've heard that actually fairly often, and it's kind of this shock, or something happens and they're in the hospital, and there wasn't that kind of pre-planning, pre-thinking of where are we and how do we respond to those situations. That just makes it infinitely more challenging because now it's really a surprise and you're kind of in crisis mode and happen to play from behind a lot of like, well, now what do we do to adjust, and do we go, do we stay? Does the offspring go care for the parents and the other spouse stay, keep the kids in school? I've seen a lot that happen a lot. Even like you guys kind of split in two different places. It's a lot easier if you've thought that through, so that as it arrives, you're well equipped and prepared for it. And I love, Hannele, what you talked about, just having those conversations early. And I think that really helps with expectations of each other, but also helps the whole family unit be at a healthier place when it's time to make even difficult decisions. Like, do they still need to drive, or is it time to take driver's licenses away? Are they willing to let that go on their own? If you've talked about it, it just helps. I think I still have grandparents, which is incredible.
Wow.
And they were able on their own to be like, oh yeah, we're not driving at night anymore. And then they're like, okay, we're not going out of the city, no more highway driving. And they're able to kind of make some of those things on their own. Having been back for the holidays, my 94-year-old grandpa was still trying to climb the ladder.
Oh my
I was like, no, that's what I'm here for.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do any of this because every family situation is just so unique and so different. But I think having those conversations is just so powerful. Saying, help us love you well. What might that look like when you get to a place where you need more help than you need right now?
Yeah. And when they're still able to express it, if
Right.
they're, you don't know if they're going to be dealing with dementia or things like that too. So they're at a place where they can express what they hope to want.
I think another piece of that, which my parents have been really good at, is they've already created the legal documents that are needed. And I think a lot of people don't think through that ahead of time. I know in the States you have a DNR and you have, you can do the power of attorney. In Finland,
Advanced directives.
Yes.
Is what we call them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so those are super helpful to have in place before you actually desperately need them in a crisis. And those conversations are not easy to have, but I think everyone feels a sense of relief once they're over. And so even pushing through those difficult conversations is worth it in the longer term.
I think too, it's really important to carve out time where you are able to have things that you enjoy and to not feel guilty about that. When you are juggling different needs or different generations, those people and those needs aren't going to go away, and they're not going to fall by the wayside if you give yourself time to be present where you are and to enjoy things.
Yeah, so true. I would say for me, a key survival technique has been my girlfriends here on the ground. In fact, I've got some coming around right after this podcast to have drinks by the fire outside. And,
Nice.
they're friends that I've had for years now. Thankfully, I've managed to have friends for years. That's not always the case in every location. But, being able to talk through some of these challenges with them. One of them has already lost both her parents. A couple of us still have, our parents. One of us, most of us are launching. One of them still has little children. So we're all in slightly different stages, but being able to wrestle those things through in a confidential space and really go, wow, I'm so, frustrated with my child who just won't get her university applications done or whatever it happens to be. Or, I can't believe my mom, right? I can't believe my mom, said that or is expecting this. Those spaces for me, at least, have been absolute lifesavers. So wherever people are, I would really recommend, find those people that you can have those conversations with, that you can commiserate with, that you can pray with, who can support you through those difficult times in between.
Wherever your sandwich sits, make sure it's at a deli with other sandwiches.
Totally.
I think it's just so powerful because there's this, I think, an opportunity to get really lost in two generations that aren't your own. In the details of the needs of your kids and in their dating lives and their school and their career decisions and their how to manage finances and dad, my car's broken down. What do I do? Living in that world with a bunch of 18 to 25-year-olds. And then also you're at the community with your parents. And I think it is so powerful to also have really good roots where you're at, which is what you were describing. Go deep. Just
Mhm.
not to be alone, to get some of those shared experiences,
Yeah.
not necessarily try to solve each other's problems, because honestly, it's just a really hard season of life.
Mm,
Yeah.
But
And
then
just to
again,
have
so is
things,
having a bunch of babies in diapers,
true.
and you guys survive.
but just having things you enjoy too, like the wheels aren't going to come off. Things aren't going to just get out of control if you give yourself, an hour to, I don't know, go for a walk or garden or something like that. And it's going to help you and give you more capacity, more resilience.
James, you touched on something interesting that I hadn't realized before, but there's also the possibility that at both ends, you've got people that are not thinking clearly because sandwich generation, we know like the younger, your brain doesn't develop till you're 25. So you're
Terrifying.
doing a lot of the thinking for them, right?
Yeah.
And if your parents have dementia, you're also doing the thinking for them. So
Mm.
it could be that your brain is functioning for all three generations at the same time. I mean, that's a lot.
That is a lot. Need to have those things that turn it off for a little bit. Good
Mm.
distractions, good reliefs.
Hannele, are there things that you wish like sending organizations or churches knew about their cross-cultural workers dealing with this?
I mean, I think it's always on so many levels, it's hard to get the message of the challenges across to sending churches or organizations. I feel like that's something we struggle with all the time on so many levels. And I think it's one of the pieces that I was talking about earlier about the mental load and the emotional load that you carry for people in different places. I think that's something that you can't appreciate unless you've actually lived it. And so something about that would be wonderful if I don't know how you put that across, but to getting them to understand that you're never quite living just in one place at one time. You're constantly living. And I think this goes for not just the sandwich generation, this goes for us in general as cross-cultural workers, but that we're always living in more than one place. And our brains are always, and our hearts are always in more than one place. And then the toll that that takes on us in the long term, I think doesn't often go recognized.
Yeah, you can look at just the work that's produced, and that's one way that
Right.
I think sending organizations and churches relate to the cross-cultural workers. But yeah, taking a step back and looking at the whole person and what else is pulling on them and requiring attention from them can give a better idea of what they're dealing with and what their capacity actually is.
I think looking for opportunities to be supportive in those crisis moments, but letting them know ahead of time that you're going to be there. So, or a sending organization or church to say, hey, if you guys have a crisis and need to get back, we've got a fund, we've got a budget, we'll help meet that need. Don't worry about it. We'll send somebody to be with your kids. Like just to pause and think through, that's a really normal part of the experience is to have some sudden reason to have to go back to home context without a lot of notice, whether it's, a funeral, a sickness and illness, a crisis, a marriage, a death, all of the things that might happen. And just to be thinking enough as you care for your people to say, when that comes, we're there for you. We've
Yeah,
had a few
that's
people in our
powerful.
life that say, if you guys ever need a ticket back, call us, we'll buy it for you. We haven't had to use that particular resource in that way, but to be able to know at least that won't be our main concern.
Mm,
And things
that
like
is
that can just
powerful.
be helpful.
Mm, yeah, it's often the practical things with going back that are the biggest stressors.
Right. You got a place to stay, or if
A car
they're
to use.
right. Any of those things.
Hannele, do you have
Yeah.
any resources that you'd recommend along this topic?
I was trying to rack my brains if I've come across anything for the sandwich generation, and I don't think I actually have come across anything specific. I think of general self-care resources, general TCK resources, which also apply to families, but I haven't come across anything written for us.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay. It's something one of us needs to put out there.
Right. Who's
There you
going to write the
go.
book?
Not me.
Right. Are you working on your PhD, James? Is that why you
Yeah,
can't do it?
that's it.
We should have our own drinking game. If I mention my house and you mention your PhD.
That's right. People would never make it to the end. Well, Hannele, thank you so much for being here. I think this is just such a relevant topic. I know in particular for the people that I meet that listen to the podcast who are in that generation, just to be seen and known and to have some ideas, I think is helpful. I'm glad you're putting yourself in positions to be able to share that, some of that resources and knowledge.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Hannele. And I appreciate you sharing your own personal story of what, your family's going through right now.
Yeah, the timing was good.
Yeah, very on point, I might say.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We really appreciated it.
Blessings on your transition.
Thank you. 6.5 weeks and counting.
I play a game with myself in my head of like how quickly it's going to take for James to make a connection to that he knows a guest or knows someone who knows a guest or has been in their house or knows a story about them, and it's everyone. So
Wow, I'm not surprised.
No. We live in a really old house. I mention our house in just about every podcast now, James.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, excuse me. I got to do that again. My nose is running. It's just like constant this time of year. Okay, just a second.